Dom, how you doing?
All right, my friend. I'm all right. How's everything with you?
All good. All good.
Good, good. We should probably explain that when we do these firesides, we log on, probably about half an hour ago. We chat and then suddenly go, oh, no, God, we've talked about everything. Every single time. It's what happens when you're best of pals, right? Yeah?
Yeah, this is like one of those things where you just end up kind of going, well, have we been recording? Did we record that? I hope we didn't record that bit.
Probably should have done. So anyway, let's talk about criminal convictions. Oh, no, not that bit. Not that bit.
Plants to drive you mad. No, not that bit.
That's great.
No, I've had a good experience this week. Actually, it's been we had a nice 2-day shoot last week, which in the studio, which was really good fun. Very different to what I'd normally do, shooting still life stuff. Very collaborative. But yeah, it's been interesting because I've started to use, as part of the outcome from the shoot, the clients requested that the stills and the video are all in kind of one place so they can be reviewed. So I've used frame.io for the first time. Now, obviously, last week we had Raphael on the show, and we were talking about Capture Live. And due to the magic of recording, at the time, I'd not used Capture Live, but that's because we recorded that interview about a month ago. And I've since used it a couple of times, and it's been really good. For those of you that don't know, if you're using a Capture One session, I mean, this is only the very tip of it, but what the nice thing about it is obviously you can send, the link goes to your clients and they can either be monitoring that live or they can come in afterwards. You can upload it, afterwards and make it live as a link, but any kind of changes they make then kind of reflect in your session. So if you have star ratings or color tags, it all kind of updates, which makes the whole bit where you have to fanny around kind of finding file names a lot quicker. Now, frame.io have also worked quite a lot with Capture, and there's now an integrated part of Capture so that you can export directly to frame.io. And frame.io is primarily designed for video collaboration and collaborative teams. So basically you can put clips on there and you can get feedback and you can annotate the images and you can kind of get all the comments from various people inputting, so it helps you with the editing process. But you can also use it for stills. But it's funny because obviously for stills it kind of runs in competition with Capture One Live in some ways, and I'll be honest, Capture One Live is far more useful for stills because of the way system goes back into your system and the way that you rate kind of all makes sense and kind of is a bit more seamless. Whereas what I found with frame.io is from what I can see, there's no rating system. You can leave comments, you can annotate, you can also kind of change status from approved to in progress to needs review, these kind of things. But it's not, if you've got a lot of images in there, it's not immediately obvious what's been tagged. It's not the most set up, I think, for quickly looking at lots amount of images and seeing what's kind of being tagged and picked and selected and starred and whatever.
Because I guess from a moving image point of view, you're going to normally just be kind of commenting on one or two bits of content, right? You're not going to be commenting on 3,000 images. It's a very different... Right.
Yeah. So I think obviously that will change, but it has been... what's interesting is obviously now Frame.io has been bought by Adobe, which obviously in some ways are a rival to Capture. Not really, as we discussed last week, because they're kind of almost going for different audiences, but obviously Adobe also own Lightroom and what have you. But Adobe have kind of staking a bet that I think by 2030 they think that cards will be a thing of the past, so everyone will be shooting from cameras to cloud. Now obviously because they're basing this on internet connectivity and speeds and data and the fact that you can use you tether to your phone. Now at the moment for stills, the only cameras that directly work with it are the Fuji system. So I think the new GFX 100 S2 works with it, but also the XH2 and the XH2S work with it. Now I use the XH2S for video and the XH2 for kind of editorial stories. So if I get the camera grip, which goes on the bottom of those cameras, then you can directly be uploading raw files to frame.io as you're shooting in real time. And for video, you obviously connect in a cable for video, and it will upload ProRes proxies or H.264, or depending on your speeds. The other alternative, I think the Atomos do a monitor, Atomos Connect, which you can also use. Right. So if you're using a different camera, you can kind of connect in with that.
Although I do think the Atomos have done a very odd thing. Atomos, I don't know quite what's going on with Atomos, but they released the Connect, the Shogun Connect, I believe, probably about a year or a year and a half ago, I think. And now it seems to be obsolete because they've just brought out more monitors, the new Shogun series, which has got this all built in. So I know there's a kind of I've seen kind of comments online of people going, "Why have I just bought the Shogun this Connect thing when you've now brought out an updated model, and you're not then going to, or they don't know if the firmware is going to be coming from the newer model onto the older model to kind of update it." And there seems to be a lot of this kind of frustration now going on with some people expecting a lot of firmware updates, and some companies traditionally not necessarily providing huge amounts of backwards software updates. Sony, Fuji, for example, constantly improving their cameras with firmware. Sony historically does firmwares that fix bugs and kind of does things like that.
Yeah,
sorry, bit of a side note.
Well, no, it was actually interesting because last week on the show, Raphael mentioned, I was just trying to bring it up to try and remember what the chap's name was, but there was a link to Malik's piece, which was that he wrote on his blog, which was all about kind of the end of cameras, basically, because ultimately camera companies can't keep, the one thing they can't seem to do well is software. And when you're trying to compete with smartphones, which are fantastic at bringing in new software, if you look at any kind of camera apps, name a camera app that works flawlessly or seamlessly, there just aren't that many. Now, obviously, Fuji have taken this on board a lot more, I think, than other camera manufacturers in terms of the software updates that they bring out. But even their proprietary camera app is not flawless. It still has glitches and still can be a nightmare to connect.
Well, interesting you bring this up. So, don't know where it is. For years, I've been using... So I have this as my little daily driver. I have an R6 with a 35mm 1.8 that I take everywhere with me, and I take behind the scenes, goes on family holidays, it goes literally everywhere with me. You can see how badly worn the Peak Design plate is on the bottom. For years, and I'm sure everyone listening is going, well, I know what he's going to say. The apps to select the images and pull the raw files off the camera, I would select, I'd rate them, and then when you rate the files in the Canon Connect or whatever it's called, you'd open it up and it shows those rated files first. So then I'd select all, hit transfer, and then I would leave the phone and the camera for like an hour to go and just do the transfer. Now, because the new iPhone has got USB-C, which has been an absolute game changer for me, connect the camera, plug it in, don't even need to use the rubbish app. Just load it straight into whatever app you use on the mobile and copy them straight over, and it takes 5-6 seconds to move kind of 30-40 raw files.
Wow.
Does mean I have to carry a little USB-C cable around, but that's fine.
Yeah.
And that's
amazing.
completely changed everything for me.
Where do you then keep them on the card, delete them off the phone, or what do you do then with your workflow?
No, so basically, because I've always, when you kind of run out of time, happens to us all the time, right? I had the 256 gig iPhone previously, and I just was constantly hitting that limit. So I had always said, when I get the new phone, I am going to get the 1 terabyte version. So what happens is I keep the raw files on the camera. I copy the raw files onto the phone, but because they're not going into my Photos app, they're only going into, I use Lightroom Mobile on my mobile, because I have a preset, and I just whack the preset on the images as they import, so I don't have to then manually do it. There's a little setting in the Lightroom Mobile that you can apply a preset on import. So I literally just import the raw files, adjust the exposure, and then export them as JPEGs. So the JPEGs go into my Photos app, and then probably every month or two, I highlight everything in Lightroom, delete it.
Okay.
Because then at the end of each month, the cards come out of the camera, they go into my storage system, and then they go into a daily camera folder, and so it's done by years. I've got a month for every year, 12 months for every year, going back to 2008. So we're talking terabytes of images, and I'm currently slowly going through them and processing them out into JPEGs, and then running them through JPEG Mini to then reduce I take a folder that's about 400 gig, and I can make it about 40, 50 gig of just JPEGs.
That was, you put me onto JPEG Mini during the lockdown, I think, and I went through my entire online archive of images, which were stored with PhotoShelter, and basically ran them through that, and then saved huge amounts of space, basically.
Honestly, it's amazing for people who don't. We harp on about this. We've mentioned it 4 or 5 times, but JPEG Mini is, as far as just, especially if you're delivering to a client who doesn't need the very biggest res, the bigger, if you are, for example, processing out event photography and they're only going to end up online, well, there's no harm to just run them through JPEG Mini. I think a lot of the time, we as photographers, we're spoiled. I've got the top of the line kind of Mac Ultra Studio here, and I've got the top of the line MacBook Pro. Not bragging, but we tend to have really powerful machines. Whereas actually, when you go to clients, a lot of them are on virtual machines that don't have a ton of power, and so if they're trying to open a 50 meg JPEG to then post on Instagram, they're like, that's massive. So I
like you said,
I think you've always got to think about where it's going.
Yeah, but also, like you said before, like the being able to nowadays, in the future, it's not that unfeasible that people will just be able to shoot much lower res images, because if you need it afterwards, using kind of super resolution and AI, you can actually upscale so much better.
Because I was chatting to someone on Mainframed, and we were doing they're doing a system swap, right? So I was kind of helping them kind of do it, and they were like, "Oh, I really think the R5," and I was like, honestly, no. For what you need, you're coming over from a 5D Mark IV. I think you need the R6 Mark II. You don't need the resolution. And for example, if you do need the occasional shot upscaled, like you say, just use super resolution. There's no point in filling your hard drives now with all these crazy huge files if you only need a large file once or twice a year. And at that point, you might, if you really do need it, you might as well just hire it in. Yeah, and it's, I shoot the compressed RAW on the R6 that I carry around with me all the time, because they're about 20 meg, and there's so much flexibility in them, and because they're only ever going to end up online, but I want the flexibility, they might get printed for a picture in my house. We're not talking crazy kind of final destinations.
So to run back to that, because I find that interesting with my personal photos of day-to-day stuff, I've always just kind of kept them on the camera, and then occasionally I'll kind of, when I'm in the studio, I'll dump them onto my archives there rather than here at home. And it will normally just be the date will be the day that I dump the card. So
would you like to know how I do it?
Yeah, it's an interesting system, because actually the month doing it that way.
Shall
Dumping personal work is always quite interesting, like trying to find ways to categorize it and catalog it, because it's so much less straightforward than jobs which are for specific things.
So I, in the past couple of weeks, have created a system that I now feel works really well for me. Right, I use Capture One a lot, and as a result, I've built it into my kind of workflow for my kind of daily camera stuff. So the way I have it is I have years. So we'll use 2023, right? So 2023, and I have already created a daily camera session template that is hidden somewhere away. So I then copy that over. Now that is a Capture One session that already has in the Capture folder January, February, March, April, May as separate folders. Then what I do, I bring that over onto the hard drive. There is also a folder in there called sorting, right? And so this is when I've gone back and done all my previous things. I empty ignore the sorting folder actually, because that'll overcomplicate it for the example. So I have the Capture One template and that I drag over into 2023, right? So you've got Capture, you know what a Capture One session looks like. You have all of those folders. In Capture, it's got the 12 months. So then what I do is I use a bit of software called Hazel. Now, have I told you about Hazel? Have we talked about Hazel before?
Yeah, I feel like we've mentioned it.
Hazel
link it in the show notes.
The most powerful bit of software outside of Keyboard Maestro that you've simply never heard of. So it's by a company called Noodlesoft, and it's brilliant. You are able to have folders being watched by Hazel. So when a file lands in that folder, Hazel will enact some rules. So I then dump the files off the card into the Capture folder. Now Hazel is watching that Capture folder, and then it goes, okay, right, there's some files here, and the rule is that it will then analyze the file. It will then see what month the file was created. It will then sort that file. So say, for example, I shot a load of things in January. It will then go, okay, they were shot in January 23. So it then goes into the January folder. And then when it's in that folder, it then gets renamed to tb_daily-cam_jan-23_ right? And so then I open up the Capture One session and they are in the folder for January. So then I'm able to just batch export I put a preset on them and batch export them. And then that goes into my output folder. And so in output, it goes output JPEG January. And then it has all the finished files in January. So at the end of the year, what I do is I literally just take all the output Jan through December. I delete the session, the raws, everything, and then just then it'll go 2023 January through December, and they'll just be the finished JPEGs.
Okay, interesting. See, I keep the raws for everything, so yeah, it does.
Right, now let's talk about
this. I don't process out much stuff from my daily camera. It might be like one or two shots. So
let's talk about this though. Why
do I keep the raws?
Yeah. I had this exact conversation with myself, and I'm not a very good conversationalist, but I was just like, I have got 3 or 4 terabytes worth of raw files here. Who is going to see these pictures? My family when I die, me every few years when I'm kind of looking back through them and trying to find something to print for a wall. Do I really need to keep thousands of raw files for that? I will say, quickly, full disclosure, I do have all the raw files because I back up to tape. So that is a luxury of knowing that the raw file is there if I need it. Yeah. But most people, I'm just about to move my whole storage workflow because Dropbox have I've got to be careful of my language here. Dropbox have decided to stop their new policy is they've stopped the as much storage as you need offer that they've been doing. So we have been hit really hard. We had 25 terabytes of data stored, and Dropbox have basically turned around and gone, you will have 15 terabytes of data as of this date.
Mm.
And so we've had to disband the team, stop all of that. And I personally am furious with Dropbox, because I was going to put everything online, all my RAWs, all my video files, everything, so I would just never have to get rid of anything. But I understand that obviously unlimited data is a bit of an unsustainable business model. But still, Dropbox, come on. Anyway, sorry. So go back to, you keep all the RAWs, but for what's your logic?
Well, the same reason that you keep them on tape.
Yes, but
the logic is that long term, you don't know what. I mean, the thing is, you could argue that with raw files, there's an element of wondering, like in 30 years' time, is somebody going to be able to find the software to process a raw file? If you really wanted to be future-proofing, maybe you should be outputting them as DNGs or whatever. But for me personally, it's partly because I don't shoot huge amounts on my personal camera. It doesn't really matter to me.
Right.
There's more raw files taking up space from shoots which are redundant. So if I really wanted to cull, that's where I should be culling. And just the fact that storage is one of those things. I just keep hard drives for each year. As long as I'm not going over what I've allocated for that year, it doesn't make any difference whether or not I keep the raw files from a personal shoot. It's not like, because at the end of the year I'm going to move on to a new hard drive anyway, just to keep everything catalogued properly. The
problem here, though, is that it then becomes, because we're going to be doing this a very long time, fingers crossed, touch wood, that to kind of just keep continuing to amass storage means that it just becomes almost unmanageable. Every task seems to take forever because you're just dealing with such vast amounts of data. Because it's not like
that. I don't find that, but also I think this is your kind of systems thing that you kind of get into. You love to have your systems, and I understand it.
I do love a system.
That comes from a place of anxiety about, the worry about things like that becoming an issue. For me, because I don't worry about them, it doesn't bother me as much, so it doesn't cause me to go, I've got to find a solution for this. The old head in the sand technique. Yeah, I remember it well. But it's no different from shooting film and having to store negatives. Like, I have to store negatives anyway. So I've got folders and folders of negatives. They take up more space than hard drives do.
But they don't cost you anything. They don't physically. When you've got the negative, they don't physically.
Well, the hard drives don't cost you anything once you've bought them. Obviously, you have to then update them every now and again, but hard drives are actually, predominantly becoming cheaper for less.
But there is also the maintenance of them, because if you have loads of hard drives sat, you need to spin them up at least every 6 months, or maybe even every year, just to make sure they are keeping going. And then,
but I'd have to do that anyway, regardless of whether or not they had JPEGs or RAWs on them. Do you see what I mean? Like, I'd still be doing that.
True, but obviously, if you've got 3 terabytes of RAWs, well, that won't even be. That'll be much, much less. That might be 800 gig of JPEGs.
I've also got 15 years worth at least of images. When am I going to sit down and actually go through and process all out JPEGs and then delete the RAWs?
Well, that's one of my jobs. That's one of my jobs. This is why I've created this workflow in Hazel, is to try and organise it all. Because actually, do you know what? I think you're probably the same as me. When you're going through a capture session, you're deleting files. How often do you actually then go through and delete the trash?
Yeah, very rarely.
Do you ever? Yeah. I don't. I never do it. I suddenly went, much?
I'd love for that to be a feature actually in capture. Would be a little reminder just to pop up and be like, when you go to close the session, do you want to clear the trash? Be like, because I never remember. You go through and you put stuff in there, and then you just close the session.
Yeah, I think there is an auto. Is there an auto feature that would automatically delete it? I would imagine probably not. It seems like a bit of a. It was a bit of a fail-safe that you have to manually do. We should have put it up
with Raphael last week.
I haven't just thought about it. I'll message him. I'll give him a call. So, by the way, what did everyone think about that? Obviously, it's very hard to gauge people's reactions when they're also listening back to a podcast. But if
you're going to leave a space for the...
Yeah, right. Just leave a bit of clear air right here, Greg. Perfect. Right. Well, what we'll do is we'll edit.
That was excellent. Such good feedback. So glad you all loved it.
You guys all enjoyed it. Yeah, exactly. Let's have a look. No, I can't see anything about that, about automatically removing stuff from the trash. But it might be worth. I went through a couple of my trash folders, and on one of my shoots where I'd shot over the course of like 2 weeks, I think we'd done about 4,000 or 5,000 images. There was about 800 RAWs just in the trash.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's just not doing anything. That is just taking up space. But the trouble is, I think that as photographers, or just not as photographers, as busy people, when was the last time you ever sat down and did like the really menial tasks of clearing hard drive space? Unless you absolutely need to free up space, you never really do it.
Yeah. Well, like I said, lockdown for me. That's when I did a lot of that kind of housekeeping, was just because we had the time to do it. To go back to what we were chatting about earlier with on Malik's piece about kind of the death of cameras and phones and software.
Mm-hmm.
It is interesting, and then obviously with Frame.io kind of and Adobe saying, right, well, the future is going to be cardless, everything's going to be shot to the cloud. This idea that, you've got the new iPhone camera on it, it's amazing, specifically really good for video. It does make you think kind of, if I was working for Nikon, Canon, Fuji, those big brands which are predominantly cameras focused, I'm excluding Sony because they have a whole other massive amount of other stuff that they do. And I mean, Fuji are the same. They've got a huge pharmaceutical wing.
The photo wing of Fuji is actually the smaller part of the business, the pharma side of that. And then also, I think the same also for Canon, because Canon have got the printer side,
printers.
The whole other stuff. It's when people talk about Honda and their cars. Well, actually, I think the car side of Honda is relatively small in comparison to all of the other things that Honda do. Honda produce lawnmowers and all sorts of stuff.
The lawnmower market is massive, yeah.
Huge. Absolutely.
All those people in those high-rise towers that live in new emerging cities and their AstroTurf lawns that they need Honda lawnmowers for.
100%. Other brands of lawnmowers are available.
But if Honda do want to sponsor, if Honda lawnmowers specifically want to sponsor this podcast, we are open
I would
to
be so down for that.
We'd have a little kind of, we could just break to and now a word from our sponsors. Do you ever find that you want to mow your lawn on a sunny day?
Classic lawnmower gag coming in. The podcast would never get going. You'd be like, no. Sorry. Shocking.
That's a kickback to the old electric lawnmowers. No, sorry, petrol lawnmowers. They were fun. They were the ones that would take off. When lawnmowers were proper lawnmowers, not like these poncy electric ones. Anyway, that's
I have an electric lawnmower, and there is one patch on my lawn. This is completely irrelevant. That it really struggles with. I don't know why. I don't know.
I thought that was going to be another bad joke.
No, it's just unfortunately just really bad luck. So
right.
Anyway, back to your point about the
lawnmower chat. So the camera. If I was a camera brand, I'd be slightly terrified about it. But also as a photographer, like obviously we've seen brands like Fuji have their Instax and their kind of instant camera side, which is interesting because that apparently is a massive part of their market as well. Like there is no Polaroid, well there is Polaroid, but there's no Polaroid land what am I talking about, pack film made anymore. And for me that's like devastating. I mean, I know there are brands that bring out like their versions of it, but they're hugely expensive. But
sure.
Fuji have their Instax, so they have their Instax Mini, they have their Instax Wide, and now there are other companies like the new it's not got the most memorable name, but the new Leica camera, what's that called? Sofort 2, the hybrid. So that is like it's digital, but it also can spit out a little Instax. I'm guessing it's Instax. It's exactly the same size. I don't know exactly whether or not that's basically they've just licensed technology or whatever from Fujifilm. I doubt it's their own proprietary instant film, but that spits out an instant picture. But what's nice about it is because it's a digital camera, you can choose which one to spit out. Because the problem with Polaroid that I always used to have, and I've got a beautiful old Polaroid land camera up above my head. It's on a shelf.
SX70.
It's not just like hovering above my head. The SX70, leather bound. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing, but you really had to pick what you shot because you had 8 shots in a pack nowadays. And it doesn't lend itself to every situation because obviously the exposure can be a bit all over the place, etc. Certain shots just would look naff on instant film. But what's been nice with like the Fuji Instax printers is the fact that you can have it on your phone and you can send it off and say, all right, that's a picture I want to print. And obviously this camera from Leica, the Sofort 2, kind of allows you to do the same, but with all in one package. I mean, it's not the prettiest of cameras. They've tried to make it.
No, I think that's a bit. I quite like it. I think it looks cute.
It's quite cute. Yeah, but that's the thing. Cute. It's quite cutesy.
Yeah,
and that's their market. That's their market. It has got some ergonomic features. It's got a little thumb winder thing, which I don't know what it does, but it basically looks like
once you thumb on.
It looks like it's been developed by CBeebies or something. So
I'm into it. I think it looks cool. Yeah, I mean, the trouble is, I'm a huge dude. I will quite happily put a tiny little cutesy camera up. Actually, funny story. In the early days of my career, back when I was like an idiot, I mean, not a lot's changed, but like I'm slightly more experienced now.
Yeah, how far are we going back to?
We are going. Let me take you back to 2004.
Okay.
So I used to have a little part of my camera bag, which actually, I mean, I probably should do this again because this was. I have there's a comedian that I used to like or still do called Tim Vine, who's very funny one-liners, and he had a sketch that I incorporated into my camera bag, where he had cut out letters and he'd be looking in a bag and he'd pull out an O and be like, oh, and then there'd be an R and you never guess what, they'd be like, ah. And it became very funny and part of the thing. And then I'd be like, right, guys, and get all this lighting set up. And bear in mind, we were all very inexperienced. So the people being photographed by me didn't really know what to expect. And obviously me, as a photographer at the very start of my career, I also didn't know what I was doing and I didn't know what to expect. So I'd get all the stuff set up. And I remember shooting in the house of Malcolm Young from AC/DC really early on, 2005 maybe. And the band I was shooting were like, oh, this is the location we found. You need to go and ring the doorbell. And the door opened and I looked down. Sorry, I mean, I'm huge and Malcolm Young is not so huge. And I looked down a little bit and I was like, oh,
He's
shit.
the guy who used to dress up in the schoolboy outfit.
No, that's Angus. So I think it might have all that. I don't know. I've never really watched much AC/DC stuff. But Malcolm Young, really nice guy. And I looked down and I was just like, oh, right, okay, we're shooting in Malcolm Young's house. So we went in and I got all the lighting set up. And then I pulled out and I used to have this tiny little ultra cheap Tesco value film
point to shoot
compact, like one shot kind of thing, disposable. And that used to be the gag that I would kick off every shoot with. But I would be dead serious about it. And so I'd be like, right, guys, come on. Yeah, get a bit together. You there at the front, you need to come a little bit forward. And then I would just be like, yeah, that looks really good, guys. All right, let's keep going. And it used to slay until one day I tried it and someone had a full-on sense of humour failure and they were like, we're paying you all this money. And in my head, I'm like, you're paying me like 15 quid an hour. Because that's like at the beginning of my career, I found my first ever invoice for a band in Huddersfield, and I had for the whole shoot in my first ever shoot, I charged them 2.5 hours at £15 an hour or £10 an hour or something, and I was just like, I'm going to get it framed somewhere because it's amazing. I thought I'd come a long way, but. Bit harsh to get that reality.
Put your rates up, yeah.
Anyway, sorry, bit of a detour.
That'll buy you half a pint these days.
Wow, I know, quite. It's not great. Not great.
But no,
Need to charge more.
I think that to go back to the Leica Sofort, I mean, it looks I'd be interested to see what they're like to play around with. But it's also, I guess, my point with it is, our camera brand's going to become increasingly, putting out these things which are maybe a little bit kooky because they have to kind of be providing something that is different to what people can just get from shooting with their iPhone. Or because there's going to be there's almost like there's different elements of the market. You either have the really high end professional stuff, your larger format sensors, not large format, Tom. Don't worry, I'm not saying large format, larger format sensors. Or you're going to go, your point and shoots and stuff like that are kind of going to disappear because what can they do that the phone can't? And the phone's going to be updated more regularly, the tech's going to change more regularly. So I don't know, that end of the market just seems like it's going to bottom out. So
there is the thing about
left
phones.
with, like, how do you create something that actually is a bit different, that's going to make, that can print the shots there and then, that looks a bit different, that is retro, that does these other things, which is what Fuji have tried to do with their kind of X100 range, all of that side of things.
Well, there is also with the phones is you're not just dealing, Canon have their app, Fuji have their app, Nikon I'm sure have their app. Apple, however, own the operating system. And then you have third parties who are developing apps for whatever niche problem situation that you need. The camera companies won't be able to justify the cost of developing those apps because the user base may be too small for them to consider it. But it also means that the camera, the phone is just going to be the most flexible tool because there's going to be an app created for almost every possible scenario. On the flip side, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. What are camera companies going to do? Like the R5C that I've got now, I've bought a 50mm prime this week because it was the one thing of my camera bag that I thought would be quite useful to have, and it was missing. But when the R5C2 comes out and they go, are you going to upgrade? I'm going to be like, no, probably not. Unless it is all singing, all dancing. But where you are at with the X2HS and the X2H, right? Like, what do you need more? It's the same. I was having this conversation in the pub the other day. What is it that we need that's more than a Z9, that's more than a Z7 Mark II, that's more than an R5? What is it that they're going to keep changing? And you're right, it's going to be the gimmick stuff. It's not going to be, the file quality that we've got coming out of these things is amazing. The new lenses that we've, for example, the Canon stuff just blows me away with how sharp it is. The files are great. It seems that everyone seems to have found a real nice sweet spot. The autofocus now on these new models is just as good as I would ever need it for my work. And the video on the R5C is completely brilliant for what I need to do. There is almost nothing they would put in that would really make me consider upgrading. And I think a lot of these camera companies are going to starting to worry because they're like, when everyone has upgraded from DSLR to mirrorless, at some point people will stop buying the mirrorless cameras and they will only buy to replace rather than buy to upgrade. So when they get lost, damaged, stolen, broken, or if they become 4 or 5 years out of date, I might not go to the R5C2, but I might go to the R5C3. But then again, that's a 4-year upgrade cycle. So you've now got people who used to upgrade, and we've had a period of a very busy period of camera activity, of going from the DSLR to the mirrorless stuff. But then what then happens when everyone's moved to mirrorless? Sales slow. And I think that's kind of where, the pricing has come in. Some of these lenses, I can only really speak for the Canon side of things. I just spent $2-something grand on a 50mm prime, which I think is like £800 or £900 more expensive than the old EF 50mm 1.2. I'm not entirely sure. I never actually bought one of those. But the cost almost seems to be factored in of these it's because it's not obsolescence, but it's cameras now are getting so good.
Well, this is the one thing that the cameras manufacturers have really still got, that they can kind of claim over, the actual body of the camera is going to lose the battle against the phone. The thing that will win will be the glass. And the fact that you can, you're never going to be able to compete with, that level of glass that Canon have just sold you in a phone because of the engineering and the fact that the physics of it. That said, the phones will get good enough that, and the algorithms for, I just saw that Lightroom have brought out a new kind of lens blur thing. And, the AI in that is going to get good enough to be able to say, you know what, actually, I want this to look like it was shot on a Leica Summilux. And you'll be able to dial something in and it will put, some random imperfections in to give you that kind of, that character that a lot of digital lenses lack. So that kind of stuff is going to be generated electronically eventually, and the actual physics of having the physical glass is, because that's the thing that's always held its value with cameras is lenses. And that's what I tend to hold on to lenses, even got like old Canon EF lenses, because they can be adapted and they can be used in other ways. I've got an old Bronica macro lens which I kept because for a while I scanned with it. I used to stick it onto Canon and scan with it to do DSLR scans. So, those...
And they last as well. They
as long as they're kept in good, non-humid, kind of non-damp places, then the lenses
always
will last.
You're a very smart man. You have the silica packs in your thing. Do you have the oven bake ones?
Well, no, I don't think I do. I just keep silica packs.
There's a company, there's a company who does them. There's Pelly and someone else, and they do these little. I have these little silver things that's full of silica, and then when it goes from clear to green or something, when it goes green, you pop them in the oven,
dry them back out.
Yeah, and so for 2 hours at a low temperature, it dries the silica back out, and then you obviously let it cool down. Let it cool down, Greg. Don't put it straight back in your camera bag. I have made that mistake before, my friend. But yeah, you let it cool down, then you pop it back in your camera bag, and it just sucks all the moisture out. Especially in the winter, when you are maybe out on location and you are just chucking a bag. You dry it off with a towel or whatever, and then you lob it back in the camera bag. Well, actually, there's enough moisture still on that to cause real problems. So silica is always a good thing. I'm sure people already do that, but
yeah, I travel with bags of silica in my suitcase anyway, just for those kind of things of if you need to drop them. You get silica in so many things that you order now online.
Oh yeah,
you might as well
you don't have to buy these things. Yeah, literally, just I have a little as well as the bake ones. I have a little sealed Tupperware box of silica packets, and then that means if I ever need to just quickly just chuck some in, open up. And ironically, that is the driest. You can imagine it's the driest Tupperware box on the planet. Because don't leave them out in the open, because they will just absorb all the air from all the moisture from the atmosphere.
Yeah, I just keep mine in Ziploc bags, but yeah, that's probably Tupperware might be more sensible.
Well,
to raid the Tupperware cabinet. It's that thing where you go in and you're like, I can't find the bloody lid for this box. All the boxes are here, all the lids are here, and none of them marry up.
Also, at what point? I don't know if you're the same. But at what point did I accidentally buy 3,000 bits of Tupperware? I don't understand.
All those Tupperware parties you used to go to.
This is it. It's different kind of parties.
I went to Tupperware, that's what they used to call you.
Tommy Tupperware. That's it. I said, I'm going to start boxing. They said, oh yeah, fighting. I said, no, just collecting Tupperware boxes.
Here comes Tommy Tupperware. Right. I better stop that. I don't want that to stick.
That's right. Put a lid on it, Greg.
You'll be out and about, and some listener for the show will be like, "All right, Tommy Tupperware." Oi, oi.
It's not the worst thing I've been called in public.
Shouting it as you walk down the street in Soho.
Oh, quickly, we should probably talk about this. Congratulations to the people who won at the AOP Awards. Did you go?
I did. I actually had a shoot, so I went straight from a shoot and kind of was one of those cliches of a photographer turning up with a bunch of photography equipment and then needed to leave in the cloakroom. And,
you were that guy.
Yep.
Cool.
So I was not only late to the party, but I was kind of in a sweaty mess, and then I kind of went in and saw far more people than I thought I was going to see that I knew, and just spent that kind of thing where you're trying to just catch up with everyone, but it's really hard and really loud. And
you say
it was
a
good
lot.
fun though. It was a really good.
But you say nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of those. Yeah, I know it well.
But it was really good. I met some nice new people I hadn't met before, and the only downside for me was when I came out, I don't know how this happened, but I grabbed something from my bag and inadvertently pulled my house keys out with it. And where the AOP was being held in the Village Underground, there's like a very tight road, which inexplicably has like a single lane road, which has double-decker buses that go down it. And I was basically on the pavement in the road trying to get something out of my bag, pulled out what I needed, I can't remember what it was, zipped up the bag because a bus was coming and got out of the way, not realising that my house keys had gone into the road. And so I went home that night and was like, oh crap, where are my keys? And I looked, well, actually what happened was I was on the train home and a little thing said, your keys have been left behind, because I had an Apple AirTag on them. And I was like, oh shit. And so I went back the next day to kind of look for them, and it could show me that they were in the area, but you know when you've kind of got the little radar thing on Find My, and it just wasn't connecting. I went back into the venue, was hoping it might pick up in there, didn't. Anyway, I emailed them and said, listen, I think my keys have been handed in, maybe, I don't know. And a couple of days later they got back and said, oh yeah, we got them in the office. When I went to pick them up, what had obviously happened is the keys had come out and they'd gone under the bus. So my keys were like totally bent, jangled.
They'd been run over.
They'd been run over by a double-decker bus, and it had killed the Apple AirTag, which was interesting. So the Apple AirTag basically had sacrificed itself, and at the last minute had gone, I'm here! And then and died heroically under a bus. And yeah, so when I went back, that's probably why I couldn't pick up the signal to where they were. But it was interesting because it still worked. I still was able to be like, well, that must be where my keys are. That's when it last pinged.
How many AirTags do you have?
I can't remember. I've got maybe half a dozen.
I mean,
various things.
I've got 4 here that are unactivated, and right. I think I've got one in every single case that I have. Yeah. So probably 12 or 15 total. And
I really like there's a company that make they make them so that you can put them in the lens mounts, not lens mounts, in the camera cover lens.
Yeah, so LS has got one of those, and
we'll link to it.
Yeah, I think LS has got one. He's got. Actually, has he done lens caps? No, I think he's done one that screws onto the bottom of a digiplate. But there's a company in the States that does the ones that go into the body cap on the camera. That's a nice.
Fannie Made? Do you think it's that?
Yeah, Fannie Made, yeah.
Fannie Made.
Brian Faney.
Yeah. Who was mentioned last week on the show as well, actually.
He was getting lots of shouts.
He's two weeks in a row for Brian.
Send us some stuff.
I mean, he makes some cool things. If you're looking for stuff that LS doesn't make in this country, Brian also makes excellent digi stuff.
Yeah, so his stuff. There's actually, that's an interesting point. Actually, there's an artisan kind of mini industry that's kind of popped up around making all these really niche products for digis, and then obviously on the moving image side there's companies like Mutiny, and then there's Swift Brooklyn, I think, who also do like a digiplate, which is much lighter because it's cut out and lots of patterns. I'm just going to reel off all these ones and see if Greg can keep up with the show notes.
I'm typing as we go this week. I've learnt my lesson.
But it's really cool. Like all these, LS is obviously our guy, right? And he makes some amazing stuff for digis and DITs. But there's a whole load of these guys, and then there's obviously Faney in the States. And yeah, I mean, personally for me, I really love it because I can just be like, looking at all this stuff, and I'd be like, "Oh, actually, yeah, that's really cool because that would solve this problem." What I should do though is I should go to it with a problem, hoping it would solve it, as opposed to looking at stuff, buying it, and going, "Yeah, well, that's a problem I didn't really have, but it's solved."
So I found that 9-volt in the States make a thing called an air cap, which is they do for the Canons, the Fujis, GFXs and Nikons, Phase 1s, PL mounts and the Sony Es, and that basically will screw into the camera body and you can put an air tag inside it.
Now 9-volt, the company, do have pedigree because they were the original, as far as I'm aware, the original inventors of the digiplate, and then it was either sold or licensed to Innovative, who then took that. Because the original digiplate that I bought was a 9-volt, and then the second one I bought was an Innovative.
Well, they make a really nice, or they did, but I was never able to get hold of it. NATO railed sunshade for the iPad and also for the iPhone, so they're quite useful to be able to then, if you're using your iPhone or iPad as a separate monitor on the set, you can run, which is what I was like the other week. I ran my iPad using CineEye to basically send signal to be able to then just see exactly what the Digi was seeing on my iPad, so that I could have that separately. And yeah, I think
it works really well.
Really useful in those situations is actually a shade on the iPad. I've not found a decent shade that you can get, and I know that those guys 9-volt used to make one.
Well, they made a cage as well, but I think it was made of ABS rather than metal, right? I'm again not entirely sure on that. But you would have thought, like, I know there's Axoon who make a cage for the iPad and the iPad Pro, but I'm not entirely sure why there isn't a better solution that fits perfectly. Like, with the amount of iPad cases that are available, surely, a really nice bolt-on one that fits perfectly and has, quarter plates on the back and allows us to mount all this stuff. Nothing just seems to be quite right. Because the thing is that I'm in the process of getting rid of a load more kit because I can't really now be bothered, especially on the bigger jobs. I can't be bothered with the hassle. I can't move. I just can't move.
There's kit everywhere.
Let's talk about this, right? Like, I'm a big dude, 6'6", 300 pounds.
It's the third time you've mentioned it on this show, Tom. I'm going to start with a klaxon every time you say I'm a big dude.
It's the height klaxon. No, I'll tell you why. Because I measured at 6'5.5" the other day, and so obviously it's weighing.
You still
on
measure
me.
Yourself?
No, I went to the doctors because I was just like, I'm feeling
visions
very
of you at
short.
Home. With Shona on a stool, kind of doing a little pencil mark above your head. Oh,
it's exactly right. It's exactly right. And then I took my Cuban heels off, and then I'm 6'5.5". couldn't believe it. But
I'm the one who needs Cuban heels. if we're ever seen in public together, just look down. I'll be the one in the heels.
I'll just sit down, and then everyone will feel. Everyone will just be like, "Oh, they're the same height. That's cool." But it is an interesting thing to talk about. Like, I have got two of those big think tank 40 production manager 40 rollers, and in those they've got a Broncolor move pack each, 2 heads, and enough stands and modifiers for each thing. They weigh a ton. So I was looking at getting maybe like a little Elinchrom ELB 500 kit to then have a 4-head kit in one, and obviously I know that would weigh a lot, but it would mean that I can roll everything out in one kit bag rather than 2 kit bags. Because even when it's photography's weird, right? You can do massive jobs with big crews and then you don't barely have to lift a finger, or on the smaller stuff I'm slogging it around on my own, and I'm happy to do either. I don't care, right? It's not that I don't care, it's that as long as I'm on the tools one way or another, I don't really mind. But have you got any experience of that Elinchrom ELB stuff?
Not the new stuff. I used to have the Elinchrom Quadras back in the day.
Because they got that mount, haven't they?
They were fine. They were the heads were a little bit plastically. I mean, I still use the a lot of the Elinchron modifiers. I have their Rotaluxes and their strip boxes and stuff that I've just kept since, and I now use them with Pro, because I shoot all my heads at Pro Photo, so I just use them with the Pro Photo adapters. But they're really well made. The Rotalux is a lot easier to put up compared to the Pro Photo stuff, or a lot quicker, should I say. But I don't have any experience with the ELB, is it?
No, and the trouble is that mount is a terrible thing. Pro Photo, I've historically worked with them for years. Brilliant mount system, best mount available. The Bron one's pretty good, but the Pro Photo mount is genuinely the best. But the trouble is, because it's the best, you also have the depth problem. So if I'm trying to then create a really compact forehead kit, then 2 of those Pro Photo speed rings actually take up a really, really big amount of space. So, because that's my other option. I sold all my Pro Photo stuff, I sold half my Pro Photo stuff a couple of months ago, and now I'm kind of really regretting it. So I might pick up another like B10 or a B10X. Then I'll have then I'd be able to have the bronze stuff and the little Pro Photo thing. I just got to try and figure out how to like fit it all in, because I think that Elinchron mount is just not feasible for me.
Yeah, so I run 2 of the B10 pluses and 2 of the B10s. The B10s are obviously smaller, so that gives me a 4-head kit that will fit in my think tank roller. But it is still heavy, and obviously you went Bron because you wanted the power.
Well,
this is get from the
this
B10
is the trouble, isn't it? I mean, the problem is when you go into the Pro Photo side, pretty much everything now for them, you've got the D2 1000s, but then you have to bring out a battery to power them, and then you've got a big monoblock rather than a smaller, lighter head, which is where the Bron kind of wins over that, because also it's much easier to fly the Bron stuff, right? But then Pro Photo have gone, okay, for our smaller heads, 500 watts, that seems to be the top out. And I've spoken to a lot of people who are just like, that is not enough. That is not enough. Especially when you're shooting outside trying to overpower stuff. You'd find that you'd have the modifier like 6 inches from the guy's face. So which is obviously a bit of a surprise.
Do you find yourself having to retouch out your lights a lot from the shots that you do?
Not now.
Work? Do you?
Not now.
Not now.
I was having
but you
to
did before.
a lot. Yeah, because that's the advantage.
That really limits the way you shoot as well. Because for me, I hate shooting lockdown on a tripod, but that's the only way really to be able to shoot that kind of stuff, because you need the plates, so you need to shoot the plates.
Yeah, of course. I mean, content aware or the generative kind of AI stuff, it actually does a real good job of moving kind of things like that. But the trouble is with the power, the inverse square law really comes into things. You can go back with and then put a bigger mod on, and then because you've got the power to drive it, it's the same look as having less power and a smaller mod closer in, because obviously it's all relative. So that's what I've really noticed, is that I don't have to light people so close, which means the spread of the light comes down further, so it looks less spotlit. Because I was finding, though, with my work when I was using the 500 watt heads, is that because you had to have them so close to get that look on the face, well, then sometimes the hands down by the sides would be, maybe a full stop or 2 difference in exposure. And that for me is like, I think when you notice it, I couldn't get it out of my head. I was just like, well, that just not how I want my work to look. So I then kind of looked around, and the problem is when you've been using Pro Photo for years, which is really good stuff, like excellent products, but then they're just making these design choices, which maybe just mean that they're no longer right for certain people, and they just weren't right for me anymore. And then you've got, your four head Pro Photo kit will quite happily fit in one of those rollers with room to spare, with loads of extra stuff. Whereas my bronze stuff, I have to have a 2-head kit in each roller, just because it's big, heavy, and it's, big and heavy.
Yeah.
Even though it's nice and light as far as pure power goes, it's still, all this stuff's just really heavy.
Yeah.
I would also say this.
Actually,
go
on. No. Go on.
Oh. I was just going to say that a lot of the time, for example, if I have to go and do a quick headshot thing, running in with 2 full broncolor kits is complete overkill.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
It is just completely.
To go back to what you said before, it's kind of sometimes nice to limit yourself anyway in terms of what you take, because it forces you to kind of think differently and think creatively in a different way. I was just going to quickly say that on a previous episode, I'd mentioned the Lightpix flash unit that I'd got.
Yeah, the detachable thing.
Yeah, and I used it for the first time the other night, and it was really good. You know, like, for what it is, it was great. It kept up with what I needed it to keep up with, considering it was powered off 2 AAs, and I used it in off-camera mode, and that worked flawlessly. I basically was using it to drive a Profoto in a modifier just as my slave. So was using it as my master flash just on the camera. It created like a little bit of fill for the for the faces, and then the heavy lifting was being done by the Profoto modifier. But it worked really well for that. I couldn't really fault it, and it's tiny, and it sits quite well on top of the camera. It's quite small in terms of, and it doesn't look out of place or anything.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, we were talking about it in our. So, here comes the plug, guys. If you support the show with a Patreon donation, you have access to our little private chat. It's not huge numbers of members, but we do have nice chats. So we were talking last week after the episode came out.
But that's a bonus that it's not huge amounts of numbers, because we're all members of WhatsApp groups, that have got hundreds and hundreds of people in, and then you're just it's
too much.
Keeping up with it's too much.
Too much, isn't it? Yeah. No, I'm a member of about 3 or 4 of them, and I just have to archive them. I just can't. Yeah. I can't keep up. I looked at one of them the other day, and it had over 1,000 unread messages. And I was just like, yeah, do you know what? That's not for me. I can't. When am I going to have the time to just go through? And then it's mainly people asking for recommendations about stuff. And it's, I just don't have time to do that. But yeah, so if you do subscribe and help us out on Patreon, it's patreon.com/exposednegative, and you can donate. It's not a huge amount. To all the people who do donate, thank you ever so much. You've just paid for our hosting for Riverside for the year. So, really appreciate.
Yeah, big thanks, guys and girls who follow and, are Patreon members, because it does allow us to do this and keep doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do bloody love this. I love it because finally I get to speak to someone real, rather than just all the extra kind of voices in my office.
We can say in your head.
And
but yeah.
No, but yeah, it is good. So obviously it is massively appreciated, and yeah, we've had some really nice feedback about the change of format to the show as well. So we do, Fireside, then interview, and it means that now we have been weekly now for kind of like a month or 2, right?
Yeah,
but we're kind of not really putting.
I'm going on holiday soon, so I'm a little bit worried about whether or not we're going to be able to keep our weekly format all the time. But so if we miss a week, you guys are going to have to bear with us, because.
But here's the thing: we haven't officially called ourselves a weekly podcast. We have just been doing it weekly, and so we've been doing all right. But here's the thing: we cannot, as 2 busy photographers, we cannot commit. We will get these out as and when we can, basically, and it just so happens that at the minute we are smashing it.
And we've got an absolute stonker in for you next week anyway. That's going to be really worth a listen. Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
Similar vibe to the kind of Zoe Wishaw kind of mentorship. Going to hopefully give you lots of takeaways, lots of good stuff to be thinking about, lots of good stuff that you can take to your own practice.
I would also say the Beth one. So Beth is really generous with how she talks, but also she grills is a bit harsh. She quizzes me and Greg and really gets us to think about how brands look and things like that. So it's a really, I would, if I was you, to preface it, I would block out an hour of your time to sit with a notepad and just make notes, because I would say it's probably one of our better episodes, and it is also worth just properly concentrating, because it's quite complex. So to take it in all in properly and actually get the most out of it, I would just sit and watch it on our YouTube channel. And while you're there, maybe hit that subscribe button, guys.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've given you pretty much a double episode today, because normally our little fireside's about half an hour, and we've waffled on for over an hour now.
We've done well. And we've been waffling now for almost 2 hours, Greg, so we've done doubly well. But I think that's probably
a good place to end it. I think for this week,
a fairly solid, yeah. Cheers, guys.
Well, when Tom stops being able to talk, that's normally when we kill the podcast.
Yes, which is why they're always so long. Cool. But yeah, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.
Goodbye.
Every time. Thank you very much for listening to the latest episode of the Exposed Negative podcast. If you'd like to support the show, you can do that by heading to our Patreon or doing one-offs. The details are on the website, and the Patreon is patreon.com/exposed negative. We'd love it if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/@exposed negative. And obviously, we're on Instagram, which is xnegative. If you want to follow us personally, mine is tombarnes.com on Instagram. And the website, and then Greg's is @GregFennell, and that's FUNNELL. So thank you very much for taking the time to listen, and hopefully you enjoy the next one.